Hello, my name is Carrie Fox, and I'm an educator with the Oklahoma History Center. Today, I'd like to do a deep dive with you on a component of the IDM component called taking informed action. I think that this is a very important element to include in some of your plans that you work with students, and I'm excited to share. So thank you for joining me today. Let's jump in. So taking informed action is really just a way for students to practice citizenship. And we're going to look at what all elements that includes throughout the course of this presentation. What we hope to do by the end of this presentation is to leave you with a better definition of taking informed action, to give you an idea about a framework that you might be able to use as you think about your lesson planning. We're going to discuss some of the challenges that you might face when you're incorporating taking informed action, particularly within school districts and the challenges that teachers typically have with regards to time as well. We're going to look at some good practices and some examples of taking informed action that you can do in the classroom as well. So hopefully you just have a large list of options and a better understanding of what taking informed action can look like in your classroom. Just briefly, we're going to do a quick review of the inquiry design model. So this is the style of lesson that I've seen become more popular with teachers in social studies and in school districts. So an IDM, you can tell you're working with an IDM because it starts out with a compelling question. And the point of the work that you're doing is so that students can develop an argument at the end. In between the posing of the question that should engage students intellectually and with curiosity, and the end response where they respond with an argument, students will build their content knowledge and practice their research and critical thinking skills through smaller tasks that help educate them so that they can make an informed judgment, an informed evaluation on the question at hand. In addition, the IDM includes a couple of different elements, such as extending the learning so that you can take the knowledge that was built in that IDM and apply it to a different discipline or a different audience. And what we're talking about today, which is taking informed action, that allows students to develop their sense of agency and to practice advocacy so that when they get out into the world, they have an understanding of how they can make change and see their wishes kind of implemented. So when we look at taking informed action, the concept is so that students can take what they're learning in the classroom and kind of engage with it in a way where they're thinking about how this would apply in the world. So how they would take that information and use it as a good citizen. The central piece of taking informed action is that it has to be informed. It's at the end of an IDM. It follows the building of content knowledge on a particular topic, and it has to be something that goes through this process called understand, assess, and act. And through that multi-phase process, students should be able to develop the knowledge base that they need in order to take good actions that are meaningful. The intent is that the social studies classroom be used so that students can practice being an active citizen. There's been maybe a disconnect in the past where students were pursuing other goals in the social studies classroom, and IDM really allows social studies classrooms to get back to that older objective of helping students understand their role in their local community, in their state, and their country, and the world. The different phases of the taking informed action piece include understand, assess, and act. So in order for students to have an action that they can apply in the world, first, they have to take that content knowledge that they learned through the beginning of the inquiry. And then what they're going to do is they're going to take that big concept and apply it to a new context or setting, usually one that's more contemporary. So one of the things that you can do if you're looking at topics of the past, if you teach history, is look at kind of the bigger concepts that the particular subject that you're exploring in class can apply to. So you can break down a lot of the topics that you cover in a social studies classroom to fall under an umbrella of government power and tensions between different functions of government. You can look at equality and access. That's been a continuing narrative, a continuing concept in American and Oklahoma history. The economy, its growth, and the inequality that exists is another one that you can examine contemporary situations that are connected to past studies. Culture and technology are also good opportunities to really connect the past with today in relevant ways for students. Once they have looked at a new situation with the content knowledge that they built in the inquiry, then they're asked to assess. So they evaluate the new situation, the new kind of problem that you've posed, and they make a judgment about what they think on this particular issue, and they make a position. So one of the goals of social studies is learning how to argue in a way that allows people to hear what you're saying. So they want students to really understand how to present an argument that is civil in its discourse and is based on good evidence and good analysis. So they're getting the opportunity to do that both at the end of the inquiry with the past knowledge that they're examining, and again with this new situation. After that comes the practice for being an active citizen. The students do something to address the new situation. So you've given them a contemporary problem, and their job is to come up with something that would impact that situation. So we will look at examples of what that might look like in your classroom more towards the end of the presentation. I thought it was important to just give an example so that maybe a concrete example allows people to understand this concept of taking informed action and how it connects with an IDM a little bit better. So here is one that you might be able to implement if you teach Oklahoma history. So if you're teaching, that's usually 9th grade. And the compelling question is who gets to vote? Now that question can apply at many different points in a person's study on Oklahoma history and American history as well. So you can kind of keep coming back to that question, and students can gain some expertise on the concept. So for this particular inquiry though, you would be looking at how women got the right to vote in Oklahoma. So the argument that students would need to demonstrate at the end of the inquiry would be explaining in some way, and the form that takes can vary, and that's kind of a different part of the IDM model. But in some way, they will explain how women gained the right to vote. And they're being asked in this particular inquiry to include what arguments were used for and against. So kind of like the ideological underpinnings for the arguments, what tactics the suffragettes employed, and what obstacles that they faced. So really placing that in the historical period in which it took place, understanding the way people were thinking in the early 1900s. Once they've done that, a way that you could have students take informed action, they're in a high school, so they can look at the voter registration process today in Oklahoma and study how other people need to register to vote. So they're not ready to vote, of course, but they can maybe during a lunch period or outside a school activity be available at a table to explain to seniors how to register to vote. And so that would be an example of being an active citizen, and it would be a good example of taking informed action. So one of the things that can be challenging, particularly for students, is it's hard to think about what being an active citizen looks like. I think for most people, the two first answers would be voting and then researching issues and candidates. But that's certainly not the total list of options for what being an active citizen looks like. So we're just going to go through and look at some other things that would indicate that somebody is really participating in the communities that they're a part of. Interviewing people that are impacted by a policy or have had an experience at an event, that would be an example of active citizenship. Meeting with community leaders, donating to a campaign, attending a community meeting, signing up to comment at a city council meeting, or to go online and make a comment when there's a policy change suggestion, canvassing, finding out what a neighborhood thinks about an issue or a candidate. You could do that in school as well. Organizing a petition. Critically examining the news is an important element of being an active citizen. Having media literacy. Running for office. Knowing how to find information on government websites. It's underlooked, but it's absolutely an important thing, particularly for students who help family members that need to navigate government services. Providing testimonies. Sometimes there's interim studies. Sometimes there are working groups that a person can assist by sharing their personal experience. Understanding what nonprofits exist is important for people who are in a community. Educating others. We see this all the time with our students. When one student knows about a particular social issue, they educate other people about it. So serving on a task force. Contributing to community resources or projects. For example, there's currently a project on kind of measuring light pollution in Oklahoma City that a student could participate in. Helping people access services is something they may already be doing, but they may not identify it as an example of active citizenship. Writing a position paper, and for this would be a letter to an editor or contacting an elected official, or just a kind of a standard paper that identifies the writer's belief. Social media advocacy is something that your students are probably already doing, but they may not view it through a lens of active citizenship. Serving on a jury, that's something that people should know is an important part of being a part of the community. Participating in a political campaign. Exposing yourself to new experiences can also be an important part of active citizenship. Volunteering at a nonprofit. Direct action protest is also on the spectrum of active citizenship. So actually going out there and protesting. So how do you take all of those different components, all those pieces, and reflect that in the classroom? So I think it would be helpful if you kind of categorize it into these 4 different categories: inform, advocate, serve, and give. That's a pretty complete way to think about active citizenship and all the forms that it can take without it getting too messy. So I took the different elements that we looked at with active citizenship and applied it to each of the categories. And while they're not evenly dispersed, it's pretty clear that there are options for each of these kind of categories. And, you know, there will be some overlap. Certainly, sometimes educating a person includes some advocacy, but at the same time, they are 2 distinct things, and that might be helpful for you when you're implementing taking informed action into the classroom. Some things to remember about taking informed action in order to, you know, truly implement this in your classroom, you have to be aware of the environmental factors around you. So this section kind of addresses that, and it offers some suggestions as well. So when you're taking informed action, or you're including that component in your lesson plan, that can take place in the classroom, in the school, or off campus. It doesn't have to be exclusively some activity that takes place elsewhere. And that's too complicated, especially if you're doing several in a school year, several action pieces. So you can mix and match. You can have some that are in the classrooms, a couple that are, you know, in the broader school environment, and then maybe one in a school year that is off campus. You're going to have a varying degree of interest amongst your students, and that's why varying the options is a great idea, because some students may not want to invest the energy and time that a more complicated or time-consuming action requires. They may not be able to either. They may work, they may have family responsibilities as well. It is good to have different options. And it's also good to meet students where they are at. Sometimes students will come up with their own actions. And to the best of your ability, obviously, some things can't be approved by a teacher, but at the same time, you can brainstorm with the student about what they would like to do if they believe strongly on an issue that would apply under that taking informed action piece. It's important, again, to vary the actions so that you have a wide mix of what those actions are. The whole point is to get across to the student, like the entire point of the project, of this component, is to get across to the student that there's many different ways to be an active citizen. So it's really important to include many different ways to practice active citizenship. So that is something to keep in mind. But I think another great thing about varying the actions is that they don't have to be complicated. Sometimes you can just have a conversation. You can have the students have an advocacy conversation with an adult, and that is the piece after they have gone through to learn the new information, the new situation, and developed what they think about that particular issue. So there's tons of different things that you can do, and some of them can be time consuming, some of them can be splashy, but others can be very simple and direct. I think that the action should be real and relevant. It makes a lot of sense to me that if you implement something in the school, for example, that the students can advocate for something where change can happen. So it makes sense to me that if they can actually have an impact on that particular policy to do an action surrounding the issue. But the thing that I think about oftentimes is like, if there's a uniform code, many students dislike uniform codes and would view that as an infringement on freedom, which is absolutely something that you would be reading about or learning about in a social studies classroom. At the same time, if you had them sit down with a principal and advocate for why a uniform code should be abolished, that's probably as far as it's going to go. So it's not going to be a great example of their ability to impact the world around them. So maybe a different kind of just a position statement on the uniform code would be better. Not all inquiries have to have a taking informed action piece. If you are just stuck on a particular IDM that you're trying to implement and you cannot come up with any piece, then you don't have to include it. It is not necessary. Be selective. Make sure that the actions that you're implementing are ones that really connect to the content that you're learning about in the classroom. That is important. And you should also be selective about what your temperament and your tolerance level will allow. Students know when you are not comfortable with a particular piece of what you're asking them to do. So if you're somebody that wants to kind of keep it just in the classroom, and there's many different reasons why you may want to do that, you certainly are welcome to do that. There are other, maybe school districts where practicing that active citizenship piece is of great importance, and maybe some off-campus activities would be appropriate in that situation, but you do not have to mimic any other teacher. You implement what works for you and your students. I do advise that if you are going to take your actions outside of your own classroom, that you just at least make your administration aware of what you're doing beforehand so that they know what is happening. You can oftentimes construct actions that are non-controversial, but we do live in a world where sometimes there are complaints about what we do in the classroom. And if that's the case, if the administration is aware ahead of time, then they are ready to be prepared in supporting you. Again, there's plenty of options that we will be looking at that you can implement that are not necessarily something that will end up with shaking fists and high volume yelling across a room. You can implement some other options if you live in a school district that has a high degree of polarization. So that's totally fine. I think, and this isn't something that you can really find a lot of information on, but I think that there's a lot of potential to develop year-long actions that you can keep coming back to that will allow you to keep that part going in all of your IDMs and allow students to kind of come at it to the degree that they want to. The thing that I keep thinking about is creating, for example, if you taught Oklahoma history, you could have a little area in your classroom or a part of the school that is like a museum. Creating a public exhibit on a topic applies under taking informed action. That allows students to do the education piece. And I think that you could have a couple of students do their exhibit on a particular topic and then another couple of students on another topic, and just move through the history of Oklahoma that way. And that way you are creating pretty meaningful products and experiences for your students, while at the same time allowing them to do that education piece in the taking informed action section. So I think that's a possibility, and there's other ones as well. And then we're going to go over some suggestions under each of those categories that we covered earlier. And just know that these are meant to be modified. So if you see something that appeals to you partially, but you think it should be changed, then you have absolutely the ability to do that. So let's take a look at some examples of what you could do to implement some of these categories of action, these ways for students to practice their citizenship under each of the categories. So again, it's critical to connect the action, the taking informed action piece, to the inquiry content. So some of these would not apply to some of the compelling questions you're covering in class, but at the same time, many of them can be adapted for multiple inquiries or compelling questions. You could have students, and this is very typical already, but it is taking informed action, presentations on contemporary connections. So if you look at something that happened in Oklahoma history and there is a current news cycle on something similar, you can have students do presentations on that. A discussion about an issue in the future, how it might play out, would apply under this category. Having students create informative posters or flyers that they can post, maybe along the wall where students line up for the cafeteria. That way they are informing a new audience too. So that would apply under another component called an extension in the IDM. A great idea to do taking informed action, especially under this category, is to invite people from the community. So for example, a local business operator, or you could have a city council person come and talk. The possibilities are endless, but it's a great way to connect your students with the community that they're a part of, to prepare them for participating in the community when they get older or right now. Interviewing a person who has had personal experience of a policy or event, that is a great opportunity for students to really see the impact of policies and make that connection, that the choices we make in a democracy impacts people. Another great opportunity for students is when those students give presentations, you can have the students do a peer review using the principles of media literacy. So they would look at the sources that the students used in order to inform their research on the presentation, and they would talk about what the students who did the presentation could do to make a stronger case for themselves with regards to their sources and how they presented the information, and also what they did well. Of course, sharing information with parents about a particular topic at an open house would also fall under the Educate category for taking informed action. Having students take a virtual tour of museum spaces is a great way to continue that education out of the classroom. And another thing that could be very helpful if they did the work well is designing guides for navigating levels of government, accessing information, and contacting elected officials, because then they can use that information to share it with others. So they might make the guide, but then they might be having a conversation with an aunt, and that aunt actually needs the information that they learned about in the classroom under this piece. They're able to go ahead and be an active citizen and help their family member. Under the advocacy category, there are many things you can do within the class, in the school, and off campus that fall under this category. Students can have a debate, and students can develop a class position statement. So that would be interesting to compare different classes once they're done. See if there's unanimity amongst all your classes or if there's some tension there. Another thing that students can do is to write a speech for a public comment. They may not go, obviously, if the city council meeting or the county commissioner meeting is during the day, they're in school, but they could write down what they would say. And that's a great way to work on public speaking skills, because those public comment periods are oftentimes from 1 to 3 minutes only. So they have to really tailor their message and really have a focused communication. You can have students develop a marketing campaign for an issue. That's something that people do all the time. If they did a great job, you could really encourage them to add that to their student resume so that colleges can know the kind of work that students worked on in their high school career or their middle school career. And they could even include pieces of that campaign. Another thing that you could have students do is to collect a news bank on an issue. You could have different students do different issues and develop a really great list of sources. You can have discussions about what makes a quality source when you do this particular piece. And that will help advance their media literacy as well. Obviously, students are going to be online and on social media, so they can bring the two worlds together of what they're learning in the classroom and what they're doing at other times by creating an issue-focused social media page or thread or video. Now, they don't have to publish it, obviously, but it's definitely giving them tools they're familiar with and allowing them to do the action with the new information with a level of comfort that they probably can bring to it. Additionally, you can have students identify organizations that support a position. So they've learned about a new issue and they can find out who in the community is working on that particular issue. And then the tried and true, contacting an elected official and sharing their position. And again, this is a great opportunity for students to learn about different levels of government, which levels of government impact what particular policies. So having students understand that property taxes happen at the county level is good. Have issues having to do with land development will be at the city level. All those things can be built in to advance their understanding of the political world they exist in and how they can impact that world. Serving possibilities. This is an important component, and for a lot of your students, they will really kind of shine in these particular capacities. One of the things that students can do is identify an issue at school and then develop and implement a plan to address. A lot of schools obviously are working on things like recycling or building a garden, things like that that can improve their school experience and environment. So those are opportunities to serve. And those are ongoing as well, and they look good on college applications. So that is something that you could consider as a great way to include taking informed action. Using skills to assist others in school and out is something your students are already doing, but identifying that for them and giving them some practice opportunities through a taking informed action element is something that might help them connect that when they are helping their grandmother fill out an application or they are translating because they're bilingual. Those are examples of active citizenship. Serving on teen boards, you'd be surprised at all the different entities that have a teen board or would be open to creating one. There's just a lot of organizations out there that want to build leaders of the future. So just reaching out and developing those contacts and relationships is definitely time consuming, but it's also something you can have those highly active, interested students be working on as well. And then you can just kind of monitor. Running for student office or participating in council can be an element of taking informed action. Participating in leadership activities and youth workshops and camps, those are offered by many different entities within the community. So there are just tons of opportunities. Oftentimes they come with scholarships, so students don't have to pay out of pocket. And they're just great opportunities for students to meet other people from different backgrounds and different areas and come at working on problems in a different way. Finally, reaching out to elected officials and nonprofits for opportunities is another good opportunity for students to serve. You'd be surprised at how many different elected officials would like to understand the concerns of young people. Sometimes they will ask the student to present at a task force meeting or something like that. And that allows the student to really connect with the ability to use their voice to help the community understand what they need as well. So those are opportunities to serve. And then finally, the give possibilities. Some of these are very obvious, but at the same time, it's probably worth it to identify them. So at the very basic level, using one's influence or network to make a connection is an example of giving. So helping somebody meet a person that they need to know for the future, maybe helping somebody get a job because one of their family members has a business and they can connect young workers with that work. That's a great example of giving to the community. Additionally, like nonprofits are interested in understanding what young people are concerned about, what they want to work on, things like that. So helping those nonprofits to have conversations with young people is another example of that. You oftentimes have class or school supplies campaigns. So perhaps students are working on people who are experiencing homelessness. During the winter, they could maybe collect mittens or hats or things like that, and then donate that at the end of the campaign. Those oftentimes are pretty popular. Additionally, collecting food for food resource banks is another option as well. And you can get creative on that as well. Donating one's own money, that may be something that some of your students are doing already. Raising money for an issue, oftentimes there will be a 5K surrounding an issue, and students who want to participate can have different sponsors sign up so that they can build money for that particular issue. Class or school fundraisers that help community members or community organizations. And then volunteering in or out of school. Again, these are things that your students are doing already oftentimes, but making sure, again, that it's related to the inquiry content, that you are able to really point out to them that what they're doing is being an active citizen, that it's not just limited to casting a vote every 4 years. And giving them opportunities to practice these things are things that are worth the time in the classroom. So let's take a review, just the larger pieces that it would be ideal if you take away from this presentation. First, taking informed action is a part of the IDM process, and it should be connected to other parts of the IDM in the content or the skills. Taking informed action offers students the opportunity to make connections between the past and today, which is a valuable skill for kind of understanding the world through a historical lens, and then allowing students to learn and practice active citizenship is something that will benefit your students and benefit the community for years to come if they get comfortable with it. So having many opportunities to do that. Taking informed action also includes those three components of understand, assess, and act. So students have got to do the research first, otherwise it's not an informed action. Once they have done that on a contemporary issue that connects with what you're studying about in class, then they can have the action piece. So that's an important component. And then hopefully this presentation has convinced you that taking informed action is more than just writing a letter to the editor. That's oftentimes kind of the go-to, but if you think about it like in a broader scope, there's a lot of different opportunities, some that take a lot of time, some that take minimal time, some that take a lot of planning, and some that take very little planning, to give your students the opportunity to do that practice of active citizenship. And then finally, if you have any questions about this or the resources at the Oklahoma History Center that we can help support you in your classroom with, please contact me. My name again is Carrie Fox, and you can contact me at cfox@okhistory.org, or you can call me at 405-522-0791. Thank you so much for your time today, and I wish you the best rest of the school year.